London 2012 was brilliant. I think that it shone a spotlight on London in terms of not just the sporting prowess. It was also a reminder that the UK is this fabulous centre for creativity. I think creativity at London 2012 could just be seen everywhere. It permeated the whole event. There was the fantastic kit designed by Stella McCartney. There were the absolutely amazing venues in the Olympic Park. There was the creativity of the opening ceremony, as well as the fantastic architecture and engineering that went into creating the Olympic Park. You've also got things like the Paralympics, where you could see creative answers to some of the problems that some of the athletes needed to overcome in order to compete at their absolute international best. Were responded to through design and technology. So that was fantastic to have that as a showcase here in London. I think that it became really good to be proud. You know, I think that as a nation we're very good at being cynical or thinking that we won't do a good job. But actually, when Seb Coe stood up at the closing ceremony and said, you know, there are 3 great words that you see on the bottom of a fantastically designed product, and they are made in Britain. I think that really made people think. London 2012 didn't only alert the nation and people at large to London's creativity or the UK's creativity, it also alerted politicians to it. I also think that it didn't only showcase the cutting edge in technical innovation, but there were really fantastic ancient crafts represented in London 2012. So the Gloriana barge that went down the Thames holding the Olympic torch was actually an example of ancient craftsmanship, beautiful gilding, carving, shipbuilding, which we've been so good at for centuries. I think that was represented too. So there was both the historic and the incredibly contemporary showcased here in London 2012.
From my visits to the Olympic Park, I really enjoyed seeing the range of smaller architectural interventions that were throughout the space. So, for example, one of the strongest corporate pavilions was the Coca-Cola pavilion, which was actually designed by a young architectural practice, a London-based practice called Asif and Penilla, relatively recent graduates. And it was fairly unprecedented for Coca-Cola to go with a young design practice like that. And I think that spoke volumes about young architectural practices in London and the ability to create something special in a context which is normally dominated by fairly generic, anonymous corporate pavilion architecture. Because I think it's fair to say that some of the other corporate pavilions in the park were not as interesting as the Coke pavilion, but the Beatbox, which was the title of that pavilion, the way in which the design incorporated interactive musical elements, sort of mastered by Mark Ronson. That was I thought was a very strong message about London and creativity and the sort of the conflation of music and the built environment. So that was a really strong element. And of course, working on the Heatherwick Studio exhibition, another very memorable aspect of the Olympic Park in London 2012 was the Olympic Cauldron, which of course was unveiled to everyone on the 27th of July at the opening ceremony. And for me, I thought there was such a simple yet powerful idea behind that cauldron, in the sense that it was trying to look at what's unique about an Olympic opening ceremony. What is it that brings together these 204 nations? It became about designing a moment rather than designing an object. So there's that sort of understated yet playful, modest, while also celebratory in some way, aspect of that design, which says a lot, I think, about London and British design.
I think London's had a fantastic time throughout 2012. I think one of the things which has been most nice to witness in 2012 is the fact that there has been such a sense of feel-good, and it seems like a cliche to talk about that phrase, but I think it's a genuine feeling which has permeated through the city, and this is something which is quite unusual for Londoners to feel. I think we were all expecting everything to go wrong this year. We're naturally cynical and not optimistic. So one of the great things about this year is I think it's basically made people a bit more confident about what we as a collective group of people are able to achieve. And I think the scale of what's been achieved this year has surpassed anything else that I've experienced in my lifetime in the city. Certainly one of the most amazing things about the Olympics is the fact that although it was based in discrete places around the city, there was that sense of a network created by the fact that there were lots of interlinked venues. And then there were some events, of course, things like the marathon, which physically connected different parts of the city. And in both cases, this really kind of helped the whole city feel like it was hosting an event. It wasn't just a series of discrete buildings like you have museums and galleries. It really was like the whole city was a backdrop and a site for all the festivities going on. And the scale of it is extraordinary. I went to an event at the Serpentine, so we were lucky enough to have front row seats for the triathlon. And I think there were 250,000 people in Hyde Park for the triathlon. Now, Glastonbury has about 150,000 people, I think, maybe a bit more, on busy years, but that means that you have more people than Glastonbury Festival just for the one event and just in Hyde Park. And then if you think about all the other events going on simultaneously, I mean, it really is unprecedented. I think that there were some slightly negative aspects to some of the events, particularly surrounding the Olympics, as well as all the positive, and I think that's something that we'll all be able to learn from going forward. It's great. It took an incredible amount of control and organisation to put on such a big show. But one of the consequences of that amount of organisation and control is that maybe there's a little bit less spontaneity and a little bit less opportunity for people to get involved who have a smaller scale of operation. It would be nice, through the confidence gained by delivering the types of projects that we delivered this year, people were able to relax a little bit more and maybe focus a bit more on creativity and spontaneity for events in the future.
I wanted to talk about 2012 because I've been part of the Olympics and, friends and volunteers, and it was all got swept up in the whole Olympic feel, and I absolutely loved the village, and the Paralympics as well was great, and it was all to be part of this really, really diverse, multi-dimensional, exciting City of London. It made me really wake up to London in a way that I hadn't done living here for years and years and years. We're looking at the global city, but with increasingly distinct village-like hubs of creativity, and I think they really spring from diverse subcultures and communities that you get in London. You're not always aware of how this happens and how influenced you are by just walking around London and seeing these creative things happening all the time. We're just so lucky to have so many different galleries, arts venues, and all the artists coming to London at the moment.
I mean, I guess the biggest influence is just in terms of London, it's the most multicultural city, I think genuinely multicultural city in the world. And I guess that's been one of the huge influences in my work in terms of portraiture, in that when I work on portraiture, even though it isn't always specifically about culture, multiculturalism or race, that I always feel like for it to be truly representative of the city I live in, the sitters or the people that I have in the images, I tend to want a diverse range of people, just because that's what I've always absorbed, that's what I've always seen. And so I guess the biggest influence would be the kind of multiculturalism of the city, which is unique, I think, to London.
London as a creative hub has always been, more than anything, a nexus and an inspiration for me, given that the city has always been the backdrop for all my work. The city has always been the influence for all my work. I like to think of it as a creative nexus where the city becomes a crossroads where creativity, talent, opportunity, technology come together. In my case, I still shoot on film, which is why we're in photo fusion, because essentially this building has been my darkroom for at least 20 years. And as such, it's the basis for which work is created.
London, for the multicultural nature of the city, it is full of different nationalities, and it has actually adopted different cultures into its own culture, which I find quite amazing. I've worked a lot in Africa. Actually, a lot of my work is inspired by London culture and Nigerian culture, Lagosian culture, I'd say, from Lagos. The rhythm of London is very smooth, and it's not as busy and as crazy as Lagos, so the two contrasting cultures really inspire my work.
My creativity comes from me, not necessarily the city that I'm in, but I feel that I am one of many. I feel like I embody what it means to be a Londoner. I think that being mixed race, growing up on benefits but being raised by a mother who was very middle class, there's so many different contradictions. It allowed me to sit on the fence. My sexuality, I'm bisexual. There's so many ways that I've managed to kind of traverse one route through a city. I've kind of experimented with everything I could possibly experiment with, and that is what it means to be a Londoner, I think. I think there's a saying that if you're bored of London, you're bored of life, and I think that kind of sums up, you know, if I ever start to feel like I'm getting displaced, complacent or apathetic, I'm like, no, come on, you live in London. And I used to hate it here. I used to hate London. I used to hate everything it stood for. And then I went to New York and I was like, oh, okay then, maybe it's not so bad here. But I think that helps. I think the fact that we are so close to so many different cultures in Europe gives us a way of comparing and contrasting ourselves. And it's a dark city. It's not all happiness and light. I think probably 75% of the time it's not. There's not much light. And that makes it difficult as a photographer as well, because you have to get creative with your light, because you can't rely on the sun. So you have to create you have to be the sun in terms of your creativity. You need to put the light on whatever it is you're trying to show.
London as a creative community has affected my work in both a real sense, with the real people and the population, the size and the scale of everything that's on offer, and also through the virtual community in London, which I think is one of its true strengths. The way the size and scale of the population also connect online, creating opportunities, meeting new people and working together. The great thing about London as a creative hub is its size, which is not unique. You could say there's a large creative hubs in other cities, but the way it comes together in unusual collaborations, and the way there's very much a community of yes, the way people propose an idea, other people embrace it, people come together and they collaborate, it works really well, and I think that's one of the strengths of London and the creative community we have here. And within London and this culture of yes, this idea of people embracing an opportunity to try something different with people outside their own area of expertise, I think it's our strength. It's what gives us unique creative opportunities and feeds back into our work and enables our work and our ideas to feed back to other people.
It's an inspirational place. Even just walking out onto the streets, you know, kind of architecturally, although it's not, you know, the most beautiful city on the planet, you know, it's just got an edge to it. You know what I mean? You look at Paris or somewhere like that, which is incredibly beautiful, but is almost uniform within its beauty. Where you've got London, obviously it was, you know, seriously bombed during the war. And I was just down in there, just as an example, I was down in the Barbican the other day, and I never even kind of noticed, like, you've got this kind of 13th century church just plonked right in the middle of it, you know what I mean, on this kind of monument to brutalism. London is, you know, is kind of ugly in a lot of ways, but there's so much, it's so fascinating. You can turn any corner, and you're almost, because of the villagey nature of London, you know, you can throw a stone from kind of a rough area to a posh area, I suppose. You're always going to find like these little eccentricities that are inherent within the city. You know. But the things that a lot of people kind of moan on about London, the kind of speed of it, you know, how driven it is, are the very things that I love about it, because I love city life, and in terms of providing creativity, for me, it's a perfect place. You know.
Yeah, and I think London's a good place to work. To say it's one of the best places is a difficult one, but I think it's a very good place to work because everybody's here. It's a very diverse and multicultural city, and I think that's the main reason why British design is world renowned. People are keen to come here to partake in design work and to study and to work, because it's just a hotbed of talent. I think there's a lot of creativity in the city. also the ethos, the thinking. I think it is unique in many ways how Londoners think and how they behave, how they interact with their city. I think also determines how we design and how we think. And there are many challenges that come with living in London, which I think also enhances, brings about good design.
It's a really amazing city to be in. I had come from the United States, where of course there are many great museums, but no museums with the kind of breadth and also the intellectual activity that you have here at the V&A. And I think for me, narrowly speaking, in terms of being at an institution, what London has meant for me is the extraordinary support and opportunity to create one project that's really driven by in-depth research on one topic. And I think it's that kind of seriousness of endeavor that for me really sets the V&A apart from any other museum in design or art in the world. It's really the most groundbreaking museum in terms of research, and that's why I'm very pleased to have the position of head of research here. You could say that London supports a kind of discursive richness, and by that I mean a conversation around questions of art and design that really isn't equaled anywhere else in the world, even a place like New York City, where I've spent a lot of time. You know, in New York you might have a few magazines, art magazines, you have the New York Times, but you don't have a public debate of the kind of complexity and the number of voices that you have here in London. And you also don't probably have a level of public interest that's as great throughout the country that you do here. Think about all the waves that the young British artists like Damien Hirst or Tracey Emin have made here, or the kind of popular acclaim that an artist designer like Thomas Heatherwick has had. You really don't have comparable phenomena like that in the United States. There's of course a lot of great art and design being made, but here it seems like it's part of a public conversation. And I think in 2012 you saw that very clearly in the Olympics. Obviously Heatherwick directly involved in making the cauldron for the opening ceremonies, but more generally a real sense that London was putting itself on show to the world, often through design, and that was very exciting, very gratifying for those of us who work in the creative sector. I think looking forward, the question is really whether London will be able to keep this kind of magic going. For me, it's a kind of golden age here in London, here at the V&A as well, which has had perhaps its best 10 years ever over the past decade. New galleries opening, great exhibitions, wonderful publications coming out. And I think if you look across the city, you get this tremendous sense of growth and excitement, and also great pleasure that both practitioners and the audience take in creative activity. The question is, will that continue over the next 10 years? And I think facing an economy of austerity that we have, and also thinking about the complexity of global ties, a kind of global network that London sits inside of, and in the past has been a center for that global network. Will that continue over the next decade? It's hard to say, and I suppose the answer really lies in, well, your hands, in the hands of the next generation.